Workforce Solutions, Rural Capital Area, 35 years. Take one and slate.
So I started as the board's contractor in 1997. I was working for a company called Lockheed Martin, and we got into the workforce development business as a contractor. And we were one of the first contractors in the state of Texas. One of my coworkers was the project director there for Lockheed Martin and introduced me to the subject and got me to move to this area from the Houston area. Well, 9-county area is a pretty large geographic space to try to travel through in a short period of time. The first day I spent working here when I was a contractor, I got to go visit every one of our offices. I met Jenna Acreage in Round Rock pretty early in the morning, and we left and went and toured every one of the centers where we had staff working. I got to meet all the staff, but it was a very long day, and it was very challenging to spend more than about 30 minutes at each location and still get to where we needed to go. The area was much more rural. I mean, we had semi-urban areas in Round Rock, San Marcos, and Bastrop, but those areas have just grown exponentially over the years to be much more urban than rural, and that urbanization is spread out through a lot of our area to where it's hard to really justify calling it the rural capital area anymore. We're the ex-urban capital area, I guess, if you wanted to be truthful about it. But manufacturing, truck driving, and healthcare have been the mainstays of employment in our 9-county area before I got here in the late 90s, and they continue to be the projected employment areas of growth for the future.
People always ask me why I stayed at the board as long as I did. And I'll be honest, in the beginning, it certainly wasn't the money. It was 3 minutes from my home and I had young children. But over the years, the board has always been family first. And it is something that we have also kind of instilled, encouraged in our contractors as well. So when I came to the board, it was a year before they became a 501c3. And I was hired to do GED preparation and job clubs. And we had what we called training centers. And my background was education. And I had taught back then, a junior high, not a middle school, in Austin for 7 years. And I always say, you can't scare me. I taught junior high, and it's really true. And my educational background and the fact that I had done summer JTPA programs in Austin, I think was really the experience I brought to the table. JTPA was Job Training Partnership Act, and when I went to work for the board, that was what our funding was from. So it was replaced by Workforce Investment Act, and then that was replaced by WIOA. So there have been different versions of employment and training. And JTPA was very individual-centered. We had like $3 million was our annual budget for 9 counties, and we worked with individuals for training and then helping them find jobs. And we did a huge summer youth employment program in our 9 counties. Some years we would have over 900 kids at work for work experience. When we switched to WIA, there were several major changes. One, the board could no longer be the employer of record for people who worked in our offices out in the rural counties. That was different. We had to have a contractor. And we went from being very individual-centered to being very universal access, serving anyone who walks in the door. We had to get big offices, not just tiny offices where you'd meet with a few people during the day. And it was just a whole different feeling of all these different programs. We inherited programs that formerly TEC had taken charge of and administered, like the Choices program, the SNAP Employment and Training program. So we had a lot more staff, much bigger offices, and then universal access. And then the next thing really was the technology we had to start using. When I first went to work at the board, there was one computer for the whole office. And I remember our AD then was Kathy Barrett, and people were saying, we need more computers. And Kathy's saying, you know, if everybody thinks they're going to have their own computer, that is just never going to happen. So I saw a lot in 35 years.
So I came onto the board in 1998. And before that, I was in the Air Force, and I retired, and I decided I was done with working. And I took a complete year off. It did absolutely nothing. And then I got so bored, because at that time I was still in my early 40s. And so I started looking for different jobs, and this one became available, and I was here. I applied for the first job I got. Was as a board monitor, and it lasted, I think, for about 2 or 3 days. And then I was fired and rehired as the planner. I would hesitate to say that I individually had a role in a lot of things. What I liked most about working at the board is back when I was working here, we all worked extremely well as a group. And whenever there was an issue or a challenge, the entire group of people would come together, and we would bounce ideas off of each other and come up with whatever we thought was the best solution. And you know, the interesting thing is there was a lot of challenges regionally when we start looking at workforce development. And the good thing is right after we made the switch to WIA and industries became the focus and businesses became the focus, then those of us that were doing economic projections and labor market projections and things like that started working together. We'd meet with the chambers of commerce and the EDCs in separate meetings, and they would tell us what they were focusing on. And it was a big challenge, I think, in the rural areas, because at that time, the economic development corporations of the chambers in Williamson County cities, in Hayes County cities, in 1 or 2 of the Caldwell County and Bastrop County cities, and in Burnett County, their EDC and chamber were very active. But in our extremely rural areas, it was very difficult for them to make the switch to focusing on industries and business, because throughout their entire history, and even for the early parts of WIOA, their focus was on festivals. And whatever they were, whether it was the Pancake Festival or whether it was the Bluebonnet Festival or whatever that festival was, that was the reason for their existence. They really didn't even have full-time positions. So they would be there in their EDC for like 10 hours a week or 12 hours a week. And so to make time to meet with us, to talk about where their industries are going and where their businesses are going and who they're focusing on recruiting, and it was very difficult. They tried, and some were more successful than others, but the county judges really then became the focus of defining where the counties were going to go.
I joined the board before it was a board in mid to late 80s. And at that time, I was with the Job Training Partnership Act, and I started as a summer youth director, and then moved on to do the Expect the Best program. Well, we went into the high schools, and for those young men and women who, were potentially more at risk of graduating, I had the opportunity to help them with their interviewing skills, job skills. In the late 1980s, with the Welfare Reform Act, a lot of money went into early care and education. For Texas, we created the Child Care Management Services System, and that had its own contracting, so it left that agency and went into another agency, where the child care services was delivered for the 10 counties. So it was Travis County and our wonderful 9 counties surrounding. The focus then really shifted from just Title 20 centers and homes to opening it up to all early learning schools that wanted to participate, opening up far more opportunities to provide more child care scholarships to working parents and or going to school, particularly because there was such a huge influx of mothers returning to the workforce or going into the workforce for the first time. So that's how I began, and childcare at that time stayed as the 10 counties until the mid-90s with the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act, which again brought in huge amounts of money. And that's also the time that it went to the Texas Workforce Commission and down to the 28 local workforce boards. The cradle career concept, actually, the first time I heard it was from the original executive director of a private industry council before it became the local workforce boards, Kathy Barrett. She and I had many conversations about me being the cradle, her being the career. Now, how are we going to join together cradle to career? And so she actually did one of our first presentations to all of our early care, or to many of our early care schools, about cradle to career. What does that mean? It's difficult at that time because we still weren't thinking about cradle to the career, why we should be talking about this, their babies. Why should we be talking about their career? And we had to pivot slightly as we presented and grew from that to recognize that we needed to talk about social emotional education. We needed to talk about positive experiences, cognitive development, in order for them to be ready, better prepared for their careers. So we had to help make that connection for folks. Since that time, even the Texas Workforce Commission, which I'm so proud of them, has accepted the cradle to career. I think one of the biggest changes that has occurred, however, is how the other businesses and the communities are understanding the critical need of early care and education. And for businesses, what they can do to help recruit and retain employees, and one of them is to help them with their dependent care issues and their flexible hours, because children will be sick and they need their parents. And having that awareness and that flexibility for their employees, I think is a big change. And the communities are also beginning to understand that, as our early learning schools are the pipeline into our public school system. So how are we supporting the very beginning? So I think it's really evolved over the years, and I have great hope for the future, even though hope is not a strategy. I have many plans of action for the future.
I had a lot of interaction with the board of directors because, we each had many of the board of directors on committees that we had. So I had multiple committees. I had the business committee, the education committee, the planning committee. So the more committees that you had, the more interaction you had with the different board members. And I could tell you that all of them were extremely professional. They all really cared about the communities that they came from. They wanted to make sure that we were doing the best that we could as a board to provide high quality services for the communities that they came from.
I got to know a lot of the new board members when they first came on. And we would try to make sure at board meetings, the new people, we try to pair them up with someone who'd been there a while so that they would have someone to say, what is that acronym? So we've always really worked at that and been successful, I think. Oh, okay, some of the acronyms. Oh, ABOD, able-bodied adults without dependence. That's one that used to drive us crazy. TWIST is our management information case management system. And I always have trouble remembering Texas Integrated Workforce. No, I can't. I think the last T really is supposed to be Texas, and the first T is the. Even WIOA, we get used to saying that, and is it investment initiative? So it takes some getting used to, and especially for new board members. And then there was always Workforce Investment Act. It was WIA, and a lot of times we would just say WIA, and then we were told after a few years you couldn't be saying that because in a Native American language that was not a good word. So you just really have to be careful with those acronyms. You do.
I think the main focus there it has always been is our ability and our goal to work with employers to work to understand what their talent resource needs are and how we can be that talent supply chain for those employers. That creates the demand for the product that we have, which is our very talented workforce here in the rural capital area, and how can we help customize and tailor that workforce to fit the needs of those employers, whether they're in Taylor, Texas, or Llano, Texas, LaGrange, Giddings, just kind of to pick out the corners of our area. But what do the employers need in each of our areas, and how do we go about crafting unique solutions to bring that talent supply to them? That's really what keeps us going, I think, day to day.
Well, one of the great things about working at the board and working with the board members and all that is for all of the programs, we always try to find a way to say yes. And so there was always so much support from the board members, from the board staff, from the contractor staff. We'd find a way to provide the services that they needed within the communities that the people wanted, the child care needed, whatever the program was. We found a way to say yes. That was the best part of working here for all those years.